In this video, we're going to be going over three simple plans: a C-spine, a rib, and a hip. First, we will start with the C-spine. So here's the PTV that we're given right here. The first thing we need to do is decide what kind of beam arrangement we want to use. So there's a few different options, and we'll get into every option in additional videos, but for this one we're going to, when you pick your beam arrangement, you want to make sure you can cover your target effectively, right? And then the other important aspect is what tissue do you want to avoid, right? So we have parotids on both sides of this target. We have the oral cavity, we have the mandible, we have the spinal cord, of course, which is part of the target, so we're not going to worry too much about that, but we have the brain stem up above. So there's a lot of sensitive, important OARs around this target. So usually something like this is going to be a palliative case. So we're going to assume this is palliative. The prescription is 800 centigrade times 1, okay? And we're going to assume we get some input on our beam arrangement from the physician. So we're going to, for this case, we're just going to do opposed laterals, okay? So we're going to treat the parotids, spare the oral cavity, but for a case like this, usually the physician will have a preference on what you want to do. So we're going to do opposed laterals on this case. Let's add a plan. Pick our C-spine PTV. For now, I'm going to leave it at 6x. Okay, and we want laterals. So we're going to change this gantry angle to 270. Okay, let's add a DRR. Let's add an MLC. Okay. We have, this is a PTV, okay, so we're gonna start with a half cm margin and see what our coverage looks like with that half cm margin. So there's our first field. There's our second field. Remember, anytime you oppose a beam, you want to just redo your MLCs on that beam. Put our prescription in, 800 times 1. And let's calculate. All right, let's also assume that the physician wants 95% coverage. So we're 100% of our dose covering 95% of our volume. All right, there is what our dose looks like. So the first thing you're going to want to do after you've decided on your beam arrangement is to weight your beams. So we're a little bit hotter on this left side. So let's just add a little bit to the right side until that looks a little bit more symmetrical. Probably something pretty close to this is what we want. All right, now let's take a look at what 107 looks like. So like most of my 3D plans, we're going to try to get rid of that 107 if we can, but for sure we want the hotspot below 110. So our 107 is definitely not covering the entire field, so I think we have a shot at getting rid of that. So let's give it a try. Oh, before I do that, let's do something real quick. So after you pick your beam arrangement, after you weight your beams, the other choice you have is energy. What energy do you want? So let's take a look at that. This is a fairly, we're treating laterally through the neck, right? It's only 14-15 cm wide, so 6x will work, and it is working right now, but it is a fairly deep target, right? We're not treating anything superficial, so we could also take a look at 15x. Okay, so I changed both beams to 15x. Calculate and see what happens. Okay, so if you want, you can kind of back up in the video and replay that a few times, but what happens is with that higher energy, we have higher penetrating power, right? Our superficial dose goes down, so our superficial dose for this plane changes a lot. We're treating a little deeper, but essentially what happens, look, our plane is cooler now. It was 112, now it's 109. It takes less monitor units to give 100% of our dose to 95% of this target with that higher energy. And it makes sense because it's just more penetrative, takes less MU to get dose deep in the tissue, okay? The problem with high energy is you have a greater penumbra region. So what that means is the dose basically from your field edge right here, your field edge is going to be about 50% of your dose, okay, and it is, so our 50% line's right on our field edge. The distance to our 100% line is our penumbra region, okay, so in this case, it's about a half cm at 15x. Let's just change it back to 6x real quick. So just take a mental note. We have a half cm of penumbra, but you can see we have a lot of skin sparing, okay? A lot less superficial dose. Let's change this to 6x. Apply to all treatment fields. Recalculate. Okay, so right away you notice that that superficial dose went up, our hotspot went up. Again, it's taking more MU to deliver dose as deep as our target. And it's a little bit hard to tell, but I mean, that penumbra also does go down, okay? So it was a half cm, now it's 3 to 4 millimeters, something like that. So what can happen is sometimes, so with that same block margin, we only have a half cm block margin, right? So if that penumbra region gets too big with that higher energy, we'll lose coverage laterally or, around the edges of our PTV. And because we lost that coverage, in order to get this same amount of coverage, then you actually go up. So it's kind of, it's a balance between superficial coverage and deep coverage and your penumbra and all that. A lot of times I just calculate both and see which one's going to work out best. In this case, I think we might as well use 15x because it does cool the plan down and we get the same coverage. Okay, so let me just this time take a quick picture of this. Let's change this back to 15. There's 15, here's 6, so kind of side by side. You can see that penumbra for that 6 is just tighter. That superficial dose is very different. So usually, if you're treating something deep, higher energy is going to help you out. If you need to treat superficially or it's very close to the surface of the body or the skin, you're going to need to use that lower energy. A lot of times you'll use mixed energy, so if our PTV was way on the right side here, I can use a higher energy from the left and a low energy beam from the right. So again, we'll get more into when to use mixed and when to use high and low, in subsequent videos. But for today, I think 15x on this C-spine is going to work out best for us. Okay, you can see at 15x that 107 volume is quite a bit smaller. Let's see if we can get rid of it. So I'm going to add a field and field. I'm going to select only those MLCs that I want to move. I'm going to draw the border of where I want them to move to. And calculate. At 3%. You can see how much smaller that 107 volume got with just that one field and field. Let's add one more to the other side. That likely will be all we need. There we go. Hotspot is less than 107. We have 100% covering 95. Oh, I did forget to change our total weight back to 1. There we go. Let's go ahead and merge our subfields. And we are done. C-spine plan with opposed laterals. All right, let's look at another one. Let's look at a rib. Here it is. Okay, so we have this rib PTV here. Again, the first thing we need to do is pick our beam arrangement. So again, a few options, but we're going to keep it simple for this video. You know, usually you can just throw a beam on and kind of start experimenting, but if you just look at this, you know, APPA, that's not going to be a good idea, right? If we used APPA, we would be treating through this big chunk of body, and, you know, we'd be hitting a good portion of the liver with some bowel, the kidney. Definitely don't want to do APPA for this type of case. What would make more sense, right, is if we went in at more of a tangential angle. Okay, so we're going to use tangents to treat this. So the idea is we're going to come tangential to the surface of the body in this area, cover our target, but miss as much normal tissue as we can. So all these important OERs and all this all this normal tissue, we're going to try to spare as much of that as possible. What complicates or potentially complicates this case a little bit is that the patient was simmed with his arms down. So we have to miss this arm, but also miss as much normal tissue as we can. So we'll see if that arm causes us any trouble. Let's go ahead and insert a new plan. We're going to treat the rib. Again, let's just leave it at 6x for now. All right, so I'm going to rotate my beam, kind of scroll up and down a little bit, get to a point where I feel like I'm as tangential to this area of the body as possible, meaning I'll miss as much normal tissue as possible. So probably something like this. Let's add a DRR. We'll add our MLC. Start with a half cm margin, which is what I usually like to use. Now let's take a look at this. So at this angle, you can see we miss, really everything. We're not hitting any bowel, we're not hitting any liver. So that's good, but you can see we are going to treat through this arm. So it's actually okay usually to exit through an arm. One of the main reasons you don't want to treat an arm is they're just very unstable, right? They will move day to day quite a bit. So just for that reason, you don't want to treat through them. But exit dose, doesn't matter if the arm moves while you're exiting through it, right? You just want to enter through it. So we could probably use this angle and then use a little bit more lateral of a beam from the right side. But to keep things simple, this go around, we're just going to stick with our opposed beams. So let's just rotate this a little bit more off that arm. Redo our MLCs. There we go. We're still, very tangential. We might be hitting a little bit more of the body, right? We're treating through a little bit more body at this angle, but we just have to do that, to avoid this arm. So if we oppose, redo our MLCs. There we go. All right, so we have a beam arrangement that we think we're happy with. What about energy? So if you look at this, definitely from this right side, we get pretty close to the skin. This left side, not quite so much. So we could maybe do a hybrid plan. Let's try that. So from this right side, from the right side, we'll leave it at 6. It's already at 6. From this left side, let's change it to 15. I'm going to only apply that change to this field 1. Okay, so now from this side, we're going to be using 15. From this side, 6. For this case, let's say our prescription is 300 times 10. And calculate. All right, let's normalize 100% covering 95% of our target and take a look. So the next step would be to adjust our field weight. But if you look at this, it looks pretty symmetrical already. I don't think we need to really do anything with our field weight. Let's take a look at that 107 volume. So again, my goal is to get rid of that 107. For sure under 110 though. Looks like we have plenty of room to get rid of that 107. And again, I'm judging that on the size of that volume. So when we start adding fill-in fields, we need to be able to leave a certain percentage of that field open. If we are blocking the entire field, we're kind of defeating the purpose. You have to, pick a good starting point. If your goal is to get rid of 107, you have to be normalized so that you have a chance of doing that. We could also, if our goal is 110, we could look at 110. But I feel like usually you can get rid of most of the 107 when you're doing these 3D plans. All right, so I think our plan is going to work out. We have that, good superficial coverage on this right side that we need, right? This left side, we were able to get away with that higher energy because our target just doesn't get as superficial, okay? Just to drive this point home, so our max dose is almost 115 right now, okay? If I change this to 6x, calculate, that 107 volume gets quite a bit bigger, right? And our hotspot goes all the way up to almost 122%. Again, it's just because it takes a lot more MU, a lot more monitor units to deliver the same amount of dose, deep to this deep part of the target. Whereas if we do use that higher energy beam, it's more penetrative, takes less MU to get dose deep, so therefore our overall plan starts out a lot cooler with that same exact amount of coverage. Okay, let's add a couple field and fields. And again, you can kind of see, you get that 3D view of this isodose cloud, right? So the edge closest to us, you can kind of follow that line right here. The far edge you can follow here. So I kind of split the difference between the two. I usually don't cover the whole cloud because I know I'm going to cover that side from our other beam. Again, I'll kind of split the difference there. Since we do only have the two beams and it's a pretty simple plan, they're opposed, I'm just going to cover this whole thing. Try to get rid of that 107 a little bit quicker. And, you know, feel free to experiment a bit with these field and fields. If you add a field and field and it does something you don't like, you can just come back here, zero it out, apply, and then delete it. Just right click on it and delete it, and then add a new one and start over from scratch. So not the end of the world if you try something out and it doesn't work. So we have a choice, you know, do we leave these little spots 107 out here, or do we cover them? The only bad thing that could happen is we essentially have a cold spot in between 107 and this 107, right? This cold spot. So if you cover this colder area too much, you know, maybe you'll get a cold spot there less than your prescription, and then it'll drive those MU up to compensate and maintain this amount of coverage, and kind of your whole plan will get hot. I don't think that'll happen to us, so we're going to try to grab it. Again, don't forget about this feature. So when you start adding multiple field and fields, you need to make sure you lock all your field and fields so that you're only pulling weight from your initial open field, okay? So the easiest way to do that is just every time I add a field and field, it's just habit now. I click this lock up here, and then I unlock the first one, that open one. Okay, then I add my weight, click apply, and calculate. Maybe one more. There we go. So our max dose is 107, which is definitely fine. It's always important to review your isodose distribution, you know, after adding all those field and fields. Looks pretty good to me. We have that same coverage because we kept it normalized that way. So I like doing that when I can, just because I know, you know, I can't lose coverage. I will maintain that amount of coverage. Let's just change our total field weight to 1, and we are done. merge those fields. There we go. Quick note, after I merge my subfields, I like to keep these unmerged plans. What it does is it turns them into rejected plans, so they can't be treated on accident or anything like that. But I like to keep them because if you show the physician this merged plan right here and they want to change something or cool it down more or just anything like that, you no longer can edit these fields. They're kind of locked. So you need to essentially go back to this unmerged plan. You can edit this one and then remerge them again when you're done. So I like to always keep these. I never delete them. I just leave them labeled, you know, something generic, plan 1, plan 2, and then my merged plan, I'll label that one however I want my final plan to look. Okay, last but not least, we have a hip. Take a look at what that looks like. Hip. Notice it's a GTV this time, not a PTV. Without even looking at it, I'm going to change this to 15x. Usually when we're treating the hip, we're going to use a higher energy because it'll be pretty deep. Okay, so our GTV does look like it is the actual hip, so it is deep, so those 15x should work pretty well for us. Let's add a DRR. Let's add MLC. Okay. So this is a GTV, not a PTV. So anytime you're given a GTV or even a CTV, you want to take that into account when you're making your blocks. So a GTV is called a gross tumor volume. It means it's the actual physical tumor. You can see it. It's a tumor. CTV is a clinical target volume. So if there's microscopic extension surrounding that GTV, the CTV includes that microscopic extension. Then there's a PTV, a planning target volume. And that includes both, the GTV and CTV, but an extra margin on top of that to account for things like setup uncertainties, internal movement, internal motion inside the body, things like that. So PTV's purpose is to just make sure no matter what happens on the treatment table, we're still treating, that GTV and CTV essentially. So if you're not given a CTV or PTV and you're only given something like a GTV, you need to make sure to include a larger margin. And for 3D cases, usually you want at least like a 2 cm margin around a GTV. So let's add that 2 cm margin. So again, for this case, it's the patient was simmed with their arms down, so we're exiting through the hand here a little bit. But again, I'm okay with that. It's exit dose, so let's just oppose this. Redo our MLCs. So you see this? We're entering through a little bit of the finger there. It's not, it's not going to affect the dose to this GTV way over here. So it's not going to really matter, but what you can do is in situations like that, it's probably a good idea just to, we can cover that up. Something like that. And I mean, we also could just leave it and instruct the therapists, to make sure the hand is out of the field. So you can do things like that. You know, talk it out with the physician, see what you want to do. For this case, we would just tell the therapist to move the hand slightly out of the field, but editing the block slightly is also going to probably be okay. All right, so we have our APPA fields. Really, any other beam arrangement doesn't make a whole lot of sense. This way, we're missing the bladder and rectum completely. Might be catching a little bowel. Doesn't look like we are though. So this is what makes most sense for a femur. Usually, it's just an APPA beam arrangement with 15x or some sort of higher energy beam. For this case, again, we're going to do 800 times 1 for our prescription. Since this is a GTV, we want a little bit better coverage than 95%. So we're going to shoot for 100%, covering 100% of our GTV. Okay, so we picked our beam arrangement, right? Next, we need to adjust our field weighting. You don't always need your dose distribution to be symmetrical, and sometimes you don't want it to be, but usually, and for these 3 cases, a symmetrical dose distribution makes sense. So I think that looks pretty good. Okay, and let's look at our 107. We for sure should be able to get rid of that. Let's add our field and fields. Got rid of a large percentage of that 107. Do the other side. Tiny little spec 107, it's 107.2, so we definitely could add one more field and field, get rid of that, but I think it's fine. We'll just leave it for this case. There you have it. So let's, first change that field weight to 1. Merge our subfields. And there you have it. 3 very simple, very quick palliative treatment plans. A C-spine, a right rib, and a left hip.